health alert about how cold it is too, and some NHS trusts are even saying don't go outside in the morning or at night. Oh, God, what these warnings are ridiculous. Don't go outside?
Look, I'm a person who loves my electric blanket. I have it on in the summer, actually. I'm one of these cold people.
you?
Yeah, exactly. But what I want to know, Jeremy, as a cyclist, do you, if you know it's going to be weather like this, or if it's icy, do you still go out on your
Oh, actually, yeah. I've gone out in deep snow before. I mean, I think basically that's what.
Have you had any accidents where you...
Yeah, I did. One thing I did that I was regrettable was I hit a speed bump that was covered by snow. And at that point, you're definitely coming off. And then there was a little lad on the other side of the street, and it was a very posh area of London. And my memory is he was wearing a top hat, but he can't have been. And he was with his nanny, and he said, "You should be more careful."
Oh, really?
I'm still angry about it.
I broke my arm on ice once.
Oh, did
Okay.
you?
Yeah, slipped on it, broke the spit up there, needed about 3 screws in it.
Wow.
And it was really annoying because, you know, when you've got an injury and you've got the cast, everyone asks, how did you do it? And you want a good story to tell. And I slipped on some ice, I'm afraid.
But there is a question. NHS is now saying don't walk outside because the trips and slips thing. Should they not salt and de-snow the pavements before the roads?
Yeah.
Why do they do the roads first?
As an MP, I got so many people writing in about that, about the local council not doing that. Definitely.
Yeah, because don't you think the pavement's the priority?
Oh,
and
yeah,
cycle lanes?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, I'm glad you agree with that. Yeah. So, OK, we will talk very shortly about, in the next part, about this whole issue of who pays for fuel and whether it's possible to say to richer people, look, if you could pay, let's say, 40% more on your tariff, we can take the surplus and put it towards the poorest. And you like that idea?
I like that idea. Why not? I mean, we've been talking about it for a very long time, actually, having these social tariffs. So it's the idea that if you're disabled, for example, if you're on a low income, especially if you're a combination of those things, if you're a low-income pensioner, also you would pay a cut price energy fee. And it can be funded a number of ways. So it could be funded by general taxation. So the government gives them a subsidy, gives the energy companies a subsidy to do this. Or you could have a sort of surcharge on everyone else's bills, which would obviously be annoying. No one wants a surcharge on their bills. But I think that is a sacrifice lots of people would be willing to make if it means that you've got the vulnerable in society not going cold.
Or why not just stop spending this crazy amount of money, billions of pounds on this net zero nonsense, and actually give the money to pensioners. And I think that Starmer should hang his head in shame for stopping the winter fuel allowance as well. I mean,
aren't we trying to do net zero so that we can become, as Boris Johnson said, the Saudi Arabia of wind?
Oof. I'm very pro fracking. Let's frack and
frack away.
And let's get cheaper energy bills for everybody.
Do you think climate change is a thing? Is one of the conditions of joining Reform UK that you have to sort of say, the weather's always changing?
No, I've always been sceptical of this, and
sceptical of what? So you don't think climate change is happening?
Well, I think that, as you just said, that we've had ice ages. We've the weather's.
They didn't normally go very well when the weather changes, so they're often mass extinction events.
The weather's always changed. I just think this is a way to tax people and tell them what to do.
Well, I mean, we can. I mean, obviously, the climate change science is very robust, but the issue is surely that if Trump decides not to be interested in it, there's no point at all in us doing any of this stuff.
Well, the United States now is 15% of global emissions, so it's actually China and India which are going to make the difference. We're 1%, yeah. I mean, I think us going to net zero, one of the main sort of contributions to global efforts that we'll have is there's a sense of moral leadership. You can only ask other people to do it if you're doing it yourself. But also what you do is you test those systems. So everyone knows how to go to 30% renewable electricity. What everyone's worried about is what's going to happen when you get to 70, 80, 90 because of intermittency. So if we go there first, then that makes it easier for other countries.
Interesting. Okay, that's a good argument. We'll talk about this issue of whether we should put more money on the heating bills for not the rich necessarily, but the richer among us, those who are above average income. Health Security Agency has health alerts for all of England, meaning a rise in deaths is likely, particularly among the over 65s and the vulnerable. Age UK has urged households to turn their heating on even if they can't afford it, while calling on the government to announce financial help for those who need it. They said this should either be a U-turn on the winter fuel payment or through some other mechanism, such as a social tariff. Labour's previously ruled out changing their minds on winter fuel. They say that there's increases in pensions coming down the track, but of course they're next year. So what about this? Andrea, what do you think? Michael supports it. Richer people paying more. See if you can do this without mentioning Ed Miliband or the Green Levy, OK?
Well, I think it's a job of government to help those most needy, to be honest with you. And, I mean, richer people pay more taxes and these should be directed anyway to pensioners, etc.
So you would restore the winter fuel payment?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. OK, well,
definitely.
and I get you agree on that, don't you, actually?
I agree on that, yeah. But I suppose the social tariff goes almost a bit further because even though at the moment the people we hear complaining about the winter fuel payment, which is perfectly reasonable, by the way, are generally sort of middle-income pensioners. But even with the fuel...
Is that the case? I don't know. I mean, it's true that the Conservatives put out an information film saying
they're wearing
how much,
Rolex watches.
Yeah, the guy in it was wearing a Rolex.
Yeah, but he could have got that from his work when he left at 60 years. We just don't know the story, though, do we, to be honest?
It's not very credible to complain about losing a £200 one-off payment when you've got a Rolex watch. I think even on the second-hand market,
that was
they go for
before
quite a lot more than that.
They crashed on the election, so that was one of those things where you think they've got some serious presentational issues. OK, back to the idea. The problem is richer, not rich necessarily, just say, well, hang on a minute, on what other basis are we being charged according to our wealth? Because you don't go in, when you go into a newsagent, they don't look at your suit and say, well, you can pay £5 for that newspaper because you look like you're well off.
Well, when you if you go to your local authority gym, for example, you're going to be able to get a discount membership if you're on benefits or if you're a pensioner. Now, that's going to be subsidised by the people paying the full price membership. So
yeah, but you're not charging richer people more.
Well, you are.
The middle-income people.
But how do they... Oh, they're middle-income. No, that's what I'm saying. So the surcharge would probably be for the majority of people. It's not just going to be a surcharge on the very rich.
But then don't we get... Not knocking your idea, but I just want to explore it. Don't we get into a situation then when you have people who suddenly get surcharged for heating who actually are what Theresa May called the just about managing? So they can't actually pay the surplus. So would you not create new fuel poor?
Potentially. I mean, you'd have to do it well. I mean, potentially that's an argument for doing it partly by a government grant, partly by a surcharge. I mean, you wouldn't want
make it voluntary.
You wouldn't want the surcharge to be much, right? So if the surcharge was 20 quid a year or something, then that would still amount to quite a lot of money.
But it wouldn't touch the sides. We've got far
people.
fewer rich people than we've got poor people, right?
Well, no, but that's the point. This would be... I think this would only work. People only really suggest this when the majority of people are paying a reasonably modest surcharge. If what you want to do is get the super rich to pay more towards this, Andrea's right, it should be done through taxation.
OK. Andrea?
I just think that, this is... It's not right, really. I memean, we've seen Labour constantly attack those who are doing the right thing. I mean, look at the private school thing. And I had, it's not always rich people who send the children to private schools. Those with special educational needs, often the parents send them there. And it just feels like the politics of envy, really. No, let me finish, please. And I just think that those who are doing the right things, and just because on paper they seem to be wealthy in the fact that they might have a decent house and things like that, but, they might have a big mortgage, they might have all this debt. And I just think we can't go down this route. It's far better that the government sorts themselves out properly and actually cares for the most vulnerable in society. But that's a government's job.
Yeah, I suppose if you do it through taxation, you still end up putting a surcharge on people, but just via the government.
No, but automatically... if you think there's a surcharge anyway, because the richer people, those on higher incomes, pay more taxes, and the government's just got to be more responsible of where they put the money. OK, now I should say the government does already offer some support for people on certain benefits, such as pension credit, job seekers allowance, or if you receive support for mortgage interest. And we'll just look at the way that benefit is paid out, because it varies according to where you are in the country. So we'll bring on 3 columns just to make this really clear here. Column 1, column 2, and column 3. And each column is a different line of supply, if you like. So 1, 2, 3. And firstly, in the first column, cold weather payments are England, Wales, Northern Ireland. The second column is the winter heating payment. That is a Scottish thing. And then thirdly, winter fuel payment, which we've talked about so much. So the first column, if you live in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, you will automatically receive a cold weather payment of £25 for each 7-day period where the temperature is 0 degrees or below. You should receive that within a fortnight of the cold period. So
Scotland doesn't have that. It has, as I say, the winter heating payment, and those eligible receive a one-off winter heating payment of £58.75, and you should get that between December and February, regardless of how cold it gets. So there are still some pensioners as well who will receive the old winter fuel payment, we should say. The government's cuts to it removed 10 million from eligibility, but those who are poorest should still get it. So that's the layout. It is a bit blooming complicated, Andrew, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
So let's talk to you. If you've got comments on this, we would love to hear from you. You can check, by the way, if you qualify, by going online and looking at the Money Helper website, which is moneyhelper.org. Sorry, moneyhelper.org.uk. Derek is in Northamptonshire. Happy New Year, Derek.
Happy New Year to you and the panel.
Thank you so much. What do you think about this? You say we'll have to say richer people, and by that we're going to mean the top half, right? So the top 50% pay an extra 30% on their bills. How about that?
Well, I think we need a sliding scale. And I think we've already discovered that there are issues with the system that's been put into place regarding winter fuel payment, depending on whether you receive certain kind of benefit. So what I would like to suggest, an idea that only occurred to me in the last few minutes, actually, is that everyone should get a basic amount of energy at a reasonable, relatively low cost. But over and above that, the price would then gradually rise. So therefore, the wealthy, who could perhaps afford more, could pay for the extra energy if they need it.
So you would have a system, all right, but you would have a system which would say, how much are you worth? And this is how much we're charging you for fuel because you're worth that much.
Well, I'm not sure that there should be different charges for different incomes. You could apply that to all sorts of things.
Well, so hang on, Derek, you've got a supporter here.
I think you've cracked it, Derek, because
really?
one problem with doing it means tested, obviously benefits need to be means tested, but to get the energy companies to tell what decile of income you're in is difficult. But if you just say your first X number of sort of fuel is at a lower tariff, then it's very simple to implement, and that will be very progressive because poorer people have smaller houses. It's these wealthy people with these huge houses who are spending loads on heating. So I think if you give everyone this initial set amount for a cheap price, and then it goes up after that, I think that's a brilliant idea. OK, Derek, nice one. Thank you. After the break, we're taking more of your calls. Should rich households pay more for their energy bills so that companies can support poorer pensioners? Now, your calls on the cold snap and whether richer people should help cover the cost of heating bills for those who are struggling. 0207 862 2222. Loads of calls. Robert in Hertfordshire, hi.
Hello there, Jeremy.
What do you think about this idea?
I think it's a jolly good idea. I also think that all the parliamentary candidates, councillors that get a subsidy for their offices and homes are well enough to pay into a slush fund that would then subsidise OAPs that are suffering in this winter.
Well, Andrew's an expert on that. I mean, did MPs get? I suppose you're paid to heat your second home, are you? As an MP?
I mean, what normally happens is the place of away at home, which for most people is London, you can get your electricity and gas bills paid when you're there.
Yeah,
and
that's quite a biggie.
Yes.
Yeah. What about Robert giving your? I mean, you're not in the Commons now, but if you were, could you give your gas to Robert?
I don't know what the mechanism would be.
I don't know how.
No.
Robert, what would you do?
Would that work?
You could buddy up with an MP, and they would just send you a cheque every month.
Well, I'm sure there's quite a few old age pensioners sent in, so would love to have that money sent to them.
Yeah, I mean, then again, to defend MPs, I mean, they often. Your constituency was Nottinghamshire, correct?
Yorkshire.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm so sorry. Of course, it was Morley and Outwood,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So, Andrea couldn't go back to Yorkshire every night, Robert. So then,
and where do you stop? Is it then the civil servants who, they've been subsidised where they get moved to different places and get places? How far do we go out the taxpayers' purse?
Well, it's a good thought there, Robert. Thanks so much. Keith in Wirral, the Wirral. Hello.
Hello there, Jeremy.
What do you think of this?
Well, looking at the MPs, I think possibly because most of them have other jobs as well. Looking at the job of an MP as a business, maybe they should have that applied through tax allowances. I don't know. I mean, that's as was just mentioned. Where do you stop? Because you have civil servants, you have people where they have allowances for travel. You have actual businesses who give employees allowances for travel.
What about, hang on, Keith, what about the
thing.
fundamental suggestion here that richer people should pay more per unit for their energy?
Well, I personally think that's not workable. I also don't think it's particularly correct because people generally work their whole life to try and accumulate wealth for their retirement. If you have a working life that is full, I personally have worked in industry. I've worked on the shop floor. I worked for 20 years in a paper mill. I put into my own pension. That pension was then basically lost because the company went into administration.
Classic story.
But fortunately, the Pension Protection Fund had already been instigated, so I did get some of that back.
Right.
I then moved into another. I went to work in a special needs school. I also started my own business up. I worked 7 days a week. I used to get phone calls from customers 7 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 at night. It was non-stop, matching that with a full-time job as well.
Is your point, forgive me, Keith, is your point here that if you had become very rich or richer than most people through all of this work, it's unfair for Michael to then say you should have your trousers felt?
Well, yes. I mean, let's face it. The circumstances are different. People are very, very keen to put people into boxes. And unfortunately, that's not the way life is.
Is it? Yeah. Well, Michael, instead of you using the word rich, why don't you use the word hardworking?
Yes, that's possible. I mean,
that changes the whole complexion of this,
but with all of these things, so with progressive taxation or some kind of surcharge, you don't want it to be a punishment, right? You don't want to say, if you've got money, that means you've done something morally wrong.
Keith feels that, obviously.
Yeah, well, that can partly be about messaging. But obviously, I think we do live in a society where we expect people who've made a lot of money to put more into the system to support people who haven't made a lot of money.
But if you translate that into, sorry to interrupt, but Keith has given us a very detailed description of his career. And if you say, Keith, because he's worked very, very hard, should put money into the system to support people who haven't worked as hard.
And he's probably made sacrifices.
But then the whole thing falls apart, doesn't it?
Well, the whole thing doesn't fall apart because the whole thing would fall apart if you tried to completely equalise the situation. So however hard you worked, at the end of the day, you all ended up with exactly the same amount of money. That would be a sort of communist system, right?
What do you mean by fairness?
Well, fairness in the fact that, if he's been breaking his back all his life working and
worked his socks
working.
off.
I mean, I had constituents
He's done more jobs than...
I had constituents who had 2 or 3 jobs to pay the way, etc. And why should they be punished for somebody potentially who's never worked?
But I feel like we might have lost the plot a bit here because everyone in this room, I assume, and the caller Keith, agrees in progressive taxation, right? The idea that if you earn a lot of money, you pay a higher tax rate than someone who hasn't made a lot of money, right? You still get to keep the majority of it.
But not 90%.
Yeah, who's suggesting 90%?
Well, because we're putting up, even as we speak, we're putting up taxes on those people. Keith can feel his taxes going up, right? Because he's being told now he would have to pay more for his heating.
Yeah, but that's still not 90%.
Well, no, but I mean, where's the limit?
It's important not to be hyperbolic here, right? Well, the limit, there's not a science to this, is there?
Well, maybe
the limit probably is 90. I think 45% is a bit low, 90% is a bit high. Maybe 60% would be a good idea. Okay. That's what we used to have in the 1980s. People still work pretty hard. OK,
Keith, thank you. That was really interesting. Sally in Surrey, how are you?
Oh, hello there, Jeremy. How are you?
Well, thanks. Happy New Year to you. What do you think of... We'll just get back to our original thought here, which is that richer people could pay more for their heating and maybe not notice.
No, I think that's a ridiculous idea. Not because the affordability factor, but I think the most important thing is the energy price cap. I think the energy price cap should be placed so that the energy companies can stop making such vast profits, so that everybody can afford energy in an equitable fashion. Once you start intervening in that way, saying people have to pay more, the energy companies are still making vast profits. With the fuel allowance, for example, that was also the government having to bail out huge fuel providers. I think the energy cap should be put in place so that they can't make such vast profits and exploit people. Because there are a lot of people who, as previous callers have mentioned, work extremely hard and pay a lot just to stay afloat. And then they've got the energy problem on top of that. France has had a better energy price cap. We should be more France.
But we should. But the time to be more France was in the 70s when they were firing up all these nuclear power stations that we were getting a bit worried about.
Of course, but I still think that we should have an energy price cap. The vast profiteering by the energy companies, we know this from all the providers of our public services, the water companies, the energy companies and so on. They are making vast profits. And the real problem is that they're still making profits, whether the government intervenes or people pay more, whether you're rich or poor. That's not the point. The point is that it needs to be equalised and a price cap needs to be put in place.
OK, thank you so much, Sally. Thanks for all your calls.